Okay.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, welcome. This is a public executive session of the Board of Selectmen. What that means is we'll be discussing, and in this case, voting on the budget for fiscal year 15. There will not be any public comment unless, perchance, a member of this board wishes to raise a question from one of our department heads. We are going to take this in department sequence. This board had a good discussion yesterday of potential adjustments. We are not limited to only those adjustments discussed yesterday. It is legal and proper for us to make any adjustment to any component on revenue or expenses to move them up or down on the budget. And what we're going to do, just as a process, is take it one department at a time, vote on each department, and then come back and vote on the overall budget. Just to make it administratively easy, with your permission, I'm going to suggest that Jen mark down that Kristen motioned and Kevin seconded each of the department budgets, so we just don't have to do that every time.
That's great.
And we'll do one to kind of put the budget in front of us, and then we'll have that for each one. I'm going to go through each budget in this line by line to make sure we are covering each one. If you guys want to look at more detail than that in the budget itself, please just let me know. If you want to address a specific line item, please let me know. Linda Gardner is going to track any adjustments we make as we go, so that at the end of this, we'll be able to look at what the totals are and look at what adjustment to the proposed mill rate from what this budget came into us at. That sound okay?
It does.
Great.
Any questions or other suggestions on?
Just a quick comment. I just wanted to follow up on yesterday's meeting. When we opened the meeting, we talked about everyone who's been involved in the process, the boards, the administrations, the finance departments, and we thanked all of them. And we also thanked the public. The public has a lot of input into what we do here every day with their phone calls and their emails, which in my case were up at around 1,500 and still climbing. So we certainly appreciate all that input. And one of the topics that has been very important to myself, fellow board members and colleagues over the years is, keeping Fairfield affordable. How do we do that? What do we do to accomplish that? What services are we going to provide that the citizens of this town expect and are willing to pay for, or in some cases, willing to live without or not pay for to have their tax rate, lessened? It's a balancing act, as Selectman McCarthy-Vahey did mention yesterday. It's a great way of putting it, but it's a difficult one. And that's why we have a process that we go through from administrations, through the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and the RTM. This year's tax rate, as we sit here, Mr. Mayor, is 264, I believe?
267.
267, excuse me. Thank you for that. And last year, we finished up at 2.4. So we're close to last year's number for what that's worth to some people. And I know a lot of people are interested in having that tax rate reduced significantly from this point, and I greatly value that, because what that does is it keeps the town more affordable for all of our citizens. And I have probably received maybe 500 emails that are of that topic about reducing taxes down to some number lower than where they are. And read them all, understand them all, appreciate and respect them all. But the caveat is, if the town of Fairfield and the citizens want to have the level of services, education, paving, and public safety, not to mention everything else from health to every other department that we have, we have budgets in this town that are to some degree set. A minimum of 2/3, if not 95% of some budgets, are people-related costs. Those costs are driven by the legislative and administrative approved labor contracts that drive the pricing, the increases, the step increases, et cetera. And if you do the quick math on that, those cover roughly between 2/3 and 3/4 of the entire budget, just that one piece alone, up every year contractually. In addition, the benefits go up, the health insurance goes up, the pension contributions have to go up along with them. So there's a lot of that that's locked in and not necessarily available to any board or commission to reduce without cutting deeply into personnel. And then what's left? Utilities. We don't have a lot of control over that. Paving for the roads, things of that nature, debt service, and pension contributions. So some of those things are fixed to a point where what's left that's available to work within to get a reduction becomes smaller and smaller after you take the pieces away that you can't do a lot about without legislative input to have changed those contracts up front, driving the expenses for those. So affordability is important. Keeping our town safe, secure is also important, and balancing both is important. So I just wanted to throw that out there, as I know everyone has worked hard on this budget to get it down to where we are today, and most likely it goes down a bit more from here. How far it can go, I don't know at this moment, but please know that our boards, at least myself, are very concerned about making sure that people who live in this town, our seniors, are able to stay in this town and able to become and to remain citizens. Thanks.
Did you have any opening comments to add?
No, I will save my comments for during and then perhaps at the end, but I appreciate what Selectman Kylie said very much and concur with many of those points, if not most, all of them. So thank you for that.
Yeah. No, thank you both. I mean, we started this off formally in terms of presentations. If I could ask that we have one meeting in this room. Thank you. We started this formally off March 4th with my initial presentation and recommendations on the budget. You've heard that we're walking a fine line. It's a question of balance, both against what the taxes we pay versus what the services we get. I think that it's, in some cases, to kind of continue with that analogy, a little bit of a chicken or egg. Certainly our neighbor to the east gets beat up a lot. I heard one of the comments last year that, we don't want to be a Bridgeport, and certainly the reference there is to a higher tax rate. I would suggest you need to go back and look at some of the history. And one of the challenges is that did Bridgeport raise taxes or cut services first to get there? The iconic story of Bridgeport is the one of the snow plowing, where one of their famous mayors was quoted a few years back when talking about snowfall and snow removal, said that God put it there and God will take it away. I would suggest to you that that cutting services, essential services like that, is the beginning of the end. Nobody wants to live in a city where they can't get to work because they can't get out of their houses and drive down the streets, and especially with the amount of snowfall we've had recently in the last 2 years, we can all readily see that. So I think that's the fine line and the balancing that we're trying to do in this budget, and we're about to step through it department by department, so we can look at that in detail. But what services do we want, are willing to pay for? What level of service do we want and are willing to pay for? And then consequently, what is the cost to that? And I'll have some follow-on comments at the end. But to get started, unless there's any further comments from my colleagues, we went through a good discussion yesterday. We've laid that out on the handout we're looking at, lays that out in department sequence. I'm going to suggest we start first with revenues, and we put those before us. And Jen, you've got the kind of motion and the second for each of those laid out. I'm going to suggest we turn to page 39, which is what lays out the revenues by source on the next few pages. And since that's before us, we had one motion yesterday, or not one motion, one topic of discussion yesterday. And I guess to help with this, unless, just to keep it moving, I'm going to
go through that.
Identify what that is, and then for any of these adjustments, we will need a kind of a motion and a second to keep those going. One of the items yesterday talked about was $8,509 as an increase to revenue for library fines. May I have a motion to accept that?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All right, any further discussion on that? All right, and again, I just want to say, we did have discussions yesterday. We went through all these line items, so the fact that there's no discussion today means that we feel as a board that the discussion yesterday covered that item.
May I add?
Go right ahead.
Just to add to that, there have been numerous pieces of backup information that have been provided, and I believe are also available on the town website, and this is one of those. So thanks to the library for updating us on that.
So unless there's any further discussion on it, may I have a motion to amend the revenue?
You did.
We
I
got,
have it. Yep,
are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So now unless there are any other motions relating to revenue, the revenue section is before us as amended.
I move revenue as is.
All right.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. So revenue has been clarified. All right. Next up, the First Selectmen's Department. And that's page, I'm going to be looking at page 59 on that.
Mm-hmm.
To keep this moving. And we discussed an adjustment yesterday of $3,940 as a reduction to the payroll line and to the Social Security line. Linda, you have those two breakouts, right?
Yes. Regular payroll, reduction of $3,660, and Social Security reduction of $280.
Okay. So may I have a motion to accept those adjustments?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So the First Selectmen's budget stands before us as amended. Linda, can you give us the total on that?
A reduction of $3,940, and let me take it off the Selectmen's budget. $458,236.
So that is the total? Are we ready to?
First Selectmen's budget.
Yep, are we ready to vote on the First Selectmen's budget?
Mm-hmm.
All in favor?
Aye.
Town clerk. That stands before us. Any adjustments?
No.
We ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Administrative services. That stands before us. Are we ready to vote? Any adjustments?
No.
Ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Registrar of Voters. That is now before us. Any discussion or adjustments?
Just a comment, I was not at the budget hearing, but though the increase in this selected budget, it shows up at 20%, that is a reflection of the different type of elections we have. So appreciate the diligence on the part of the registrars as well.
I think to summarize that discussion, there is some question about whether there'll be primaries. From a registrar of voters standpoint, they have to conduct primaries like they conduct a regular election. So we have to have those costs in there. In past years, when we didn't have as high a probability of primaries, we may have put that money in contingency and saved it and added it to the budget when needed. Based on the best available rumors, we are anticipating primaries, so we are leaving that money in the budget at this point. We can remove it from the budget to contingency after if, in fact, those primaries do not happen. Everybody ready to vote?
Mm-hmm.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Next up, Zoning Board of Appeals. Any discussion or adjustments? All right, are we ready to vote?
Mhm.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Next up, Town Planning and Zoning. Any discussion or adjustments? All right, ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next up, the Probate Court. Any discussion or adjustments?
No.
Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next up, the Historic District Commission. Any discussion or adjustments? We ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Next up, the Conservation Commission. Any discussion or adjustments?
Just
Go right ahead.
a comment that, this is an area of the budget that I recognize. There were requests for other positions, and the department head talked about the demands in the department, and I think this is one area where we see that our department heads are working with us, as Selectman Kylie said at the beginning, to balance the need for affordability and to provide services. So appreciate that on the part of the department, and recognize the hard work that they do.
Yep, no, thank you. I think that if you go through this, you'll find that many departments had an initial request considerably higher than what is in this budget. If I remember as I went through, there were about $3.8 million in adjustments. Approximately $800,000 to the Board of Ed, but $3 million to the other town departments from their initial requests in terms of what went through. So everybody is trying to do their best to do more with less as we go through this. And I just wanted to emphasize what Selectman McCarthy-Vahey had said. Are we ready to vote on conservation?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next up, the Shellfish Commission. Any adjustments or discussion?
No.
Ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next up, legal services. Any discussion or adjustments? Okay. Ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Miscellaneous contingencies. Any adjustments or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Next up, human resources. Now, this was one of the items we discussed yesterday. Based on the February results from the town health insurance, we're running about $250,000 to the good. That means we can reduce our health insurance line that's in the human resources budget by $250,000. May I have a motion to amend?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion on the amendment?
No.
Okay.
Yep.
Ready to vote on the amendment?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. The department as amended stands before us. Are we ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Next up, community and economic development. Any discussion or amendments?
Again, I would just like to highlight the conversation that we had with Mr. Barnhart at the joint hearings with the Board of Finance, and talking about, the potential of staff support to free up his time to do more in terms of business development and working with local businesses, and also attracting other businesses to town. So this is another area where we find that our department head is really doing a superb job, and recognizing that, additional resources, might be helpful in that, but he's working within what he has. So just highlighting that.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Next up, the Harbor Management Commission. Any discussion or amendments?
No.
All right, ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next up, contingency. Mr. Kiley.
Mr. Tetro, if you would, could we hold this contingency item until the end of our town side deliberations? So that I can, evaluate where we are at that point in time.
Okay. You okay with that?
Absolutely.
All right, so we will come back to this. All right, next up, contribution to surplus. Any discussion or adjustments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next up, okay, a series of these. Regional Youth Adult Social Action Partnership. Any adjustments or discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Pequot Library. Any discussion or adjustments?
Yes, sir. Pequot Library, they did a very interesting presentation to us last 2 weeks back at the Board of Finance meetings, and the question I came away from that meeting with is, I'm not exactly positive why they were the only nonprofit that we took any money from. I know it's $350 and $25 doesn't seem like a lot, but it sure seemed like a lot to them when they came before us that night and they were making the case for it. It's not that I know there's a committee out there that's done a lot of work, but there still is a lot of work that needs to still be done to all the nonprofits, the process, how agencies are considered. We might move some over to the Board of Education side, ones that make sense to go there. And I'm fully supportive of that process. And more than likely, the decisions that come from that committee, should they be reasonable. But in this particular case, since that committee has not completed their work, and since this is the only nonprofit that was affected by the administration's recommendations, I think you've already answered the question about why you did it. I just disagree that it was done, and I would like us to consider replacing that $25,000 to the Pequot Library.
Is that a motion?
I move to increase the Pequot Library line 2130 by $25,000.
Is there a second?
I'll second for discussion purposes.
Okay. I think,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
and if you wanted to expand on that,
I think I explained myself as best I could. I just think I just don't know if it's the right time to do an action against any one particular nonprofit. I'm not saying it was egregious or anything. I'm just saying I would prefer to wait until there's an action plan in place to address all of them, whether they're done differently or done at different levels or whatever the outcome of that committee might be. So I think it's just, from my perspective, a bit premature.
okay. I just, to address that from the top, one, from my standpoint, the committee's done. They came back, gave us the report recommendations, and unless this board charges them with something else, one of the items coming up on our, in the short term will be to disband that committee because their mission has been accomplished at least as best as they could do it. Second, this was not the only not-for-profit cut. There were 2 other adjustments made in addition to this one. Third, even though I believe all 3 of us had questions or concerns about exactly what the recommendations were from the committee, and certainly this board is going to discuss those in more detail, I did take the time this year to sit down with each individual nonprofit. I did sit down and look at what the return was in each of those. And with respect to Pequot, as I said at the joint session, I think Pequot provides a valuable resource to our community. I think they've been around for 125 years and been serving our community. I'm fully supportive of the town providing support for them. And I would not anticipate this number changing, at least in terms of my recommendation, in future years. However, because of all the hubbub that circulated around this last year, we never actually discussed Pequot with any sort of objectivity last year. When I look back at past years, our contributions to Pequot peaked around $380,000 a year. Bringing it down to $325 is approximately a 20% decrease in that. When I look at the fact that we did decrease our library last year and have hit that with certain adjustments all the way through, including most recently $50,000 to help come up with $500,000 to support the shortfall on a special ed for the Board of Ed. I thought this was an appropriate adjustment given where we are. But as I said, I do value the contribution to Pequot. I don't believe that we need to wait for a committee. Frankly, the committee's finished their recommendations. Committee has been around for 4 years, has met twice with the Board of Selectmen, has made 2 sets of recommendations. I'm not sure if the committee ever actually sat down with the not-for-profits. I did, and based on that, I think that this 25 grand number represents about less than 2% of a 1.2 overall $1 million budget. And and again, to get to a tax increase as low as this one is, we have asked everyone to share, from the Board of Ed to Pequot to other departments in town to our library, not getting their funding completely restored from the cuts last year. So we can't, to our Department of Public Works, not getting their paving fully funded. I can go on and on as I go through each department. I'm not sure there's a department head here that would stand up and say, I got all the money I've requested over the last few years. Certainly not this year. But there's no way, and that's when we talk about the balance, as we did up front, as both of my colleagues have mentioned. Part of that balance is a compromise between what you need to do everything as well as you'd like to and what the taxpayers can afford to pay. And that's kind of where we came down. So that's one of the adjustments that contributes to that. Certainly appreciate the fact there can be differing opinions on that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Annie, go ahead.
I appreciate Selectman Kylie's comments about the process in terms of the not-for-profit process, and I think that conversation, as we referenced, there still is outstanding conversation that needs to be had, and whether that happens here at the Board of Selectmen table or at the first Selectman level, or if there is another committee that this body chooses to charge, I think it's a valid, outstanding question that is there. And having taken part in those conversations with the committee, I think there are some missing pieces. But one of the things that we talked about as the nonprofit committee was recognizing that whatever recommendations were made, whether it was the set of recommendations that are presently out there, or any other recommendations for a process going forward, was that the first selectman in our budget process, that the process would still remain as long as we keep things in those separate line items, which is what we have for now, as the first selectman's proposed budget, that this body and the other bodies would have the ability to add or subtract. I think one of the key points to Mr. Tetro's comments for me were the fact that he did sit down with the nonprofits, and the second part of that that's, I think, very important to me to hear is that this is a level at which he anticipates recommending funding in the future. In other words, my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there's not a plan to step down in some way continually that request so that it is lower and lower. I think I would agree that it goes back to the issue that we're all dealing with, which is where we are going to balance those needs and the affordability. So I am not going to say that this is an insignificant cut for this budget, because I think, as we see with all the nonprofits, though the dollar amounts may be certainly smaller than many of our other budgets, it's significant to those who are trying to maintain the services. So I also concur with First Selectman in terms of the balance with the various libraries. So when I look at the Pequot proposed cut by the First Selectman, it is in line with some of the cuts that all of our libraries have taken this year. So I will not be supporting the motion to restore for those reasons.
Okay. And just to be clear, to follow up on that, we had kind of postponed informally our discussion on that topic because the report from the committee came to us at the last minute before our January 29th board meeting. That will be coming back before us for discussion, so we'll have time to allow for different input and also to get this board fully involved in the discussion, feedback, and where we go in the future with this. All right, are we ready to vote on the amendment?
Yes.
All in favor? All opposed?
Aye.
All right. The item stands before us. Any further discussion or amendments? Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next up, Fairfield Counseling Services. Any discussion or amendments? All right, ready to vote? All in
Yes.
favor?
Aye.
The Discovery Museum. Any adjustments or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
The Greater Bridgeport Regional Council. Any adjustments or discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
The Audubon Society. Any discussion or adjustments? All right, ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
The Greater Bridgeport Transit Authority. Any discussion or adjustments? All in favor?
Aye.
The Fairfield Museum and History Center. Any discussion or adjustments? All in favor?
Aye.
The Fairfield Veterans Advisory and Information Service. Any discussion or adjustments?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
The Southwest Connecticut EMS Council. Any adjustments or discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
The Southwest Regional Mental Health Board. Any discussion or adjustments?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Southwest Regional Communications Center has been moved to another part of the budget. Linda, do we come back to that as an item?
No,
That's in another department. So within the, is it the ECC budget? So we don't have to address that line item at all? All right. The Council of Churches Janus Center. Any discussion or adjustments? All in favor?
Aye.
Grassmere by the Sea. Any adjustments or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Sullivan McKinney Elder Housing. Any discussion or adjustments? All in favor?
Aye.
I should point out that that not-for-profit actually had an increase with the first selectman's recommendation, so that are 4 different not-for-profits where their requests were adjusted. Fairfield Arts Center is no longer here. The Kennedy Center. Any adjustments or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Mill River Wetland Committee. Any discussions or adjustment? All in favor?
Aye.
The Pilot House. Any adjustments or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
The Center for Women and Families. Any adjustments or discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Private School Transportation. Any adjustments or discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Health and Welfare Services. Any adjustments or discussion? Ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next up is Finance. You ready to go? Let's see, 310, Finance is before us. Any adjustments or discussion?
Mr. Tetra,
Go right ahead.
I move to reduce budget 3010 by $35,507. That is the part-time help that's being requested, the new part-time staff accountant, and the associated Social Security benefits for the year, totaling $35,507. And just briefly, we had presentations on this. My rationale is twofold. Number one, it's the affordability issue. We just need to cut corners, or we need to cut costs, excuse me. and keep our town as affordable as we possibly can. And the presentations led me to believe that between now having a full-time chief of staff and by moving a few other pieces around within the finance department, that we could get this work done by doing some maneuvering within the department itself. And I think it's something that we should not be adding at this time.
Is there a second?
I'll second for discussion purposes.
Okay. Any further discussion? Did you have any additional
No,
comments?
that's
Is that-
basically
Did you have anything to add?
And we did, we talked about this yesterday
a couple times, yeah. Yep.
a bit, and we
Yep.
talked about it also at the joint hearings as well. And I think yesterday, actually, there was some new information in terms of the perspective on the position. My concern with this is that what I'm hearing is that there are some critical functions that are not able to happen in that department in the way that would be perhaps most prudent, specifically with respect to the internal auditing piece. And while, you know, as I thought about this last night and thought about Mr. Mayor's comments in terms of his own expertise, in terms of providing an experience doing strategic planning, wondered if there, you know, is a way for us to still address those needs. And I'm in support of the position just because of the concern about the ability to provide those needed services. This is where, you know, going back to the comments at the beginning,
Sure.
we all are trying to do that balancing act, and we have different ideas about how to best get there.
Absolutely.
This one is a position that I will support going forward, again, because I want to make sure that those important functions are happening. Certainly am interested in the most cost-effective way to do that. But what I'm hearing from the department is that there aren't the resources there to be able to do the functions that we really need to do. So I won't be supporting this motion.
I think that listening to what Mr. Mayor had to say yesterday, everybody that I've heard from agrees we need to do better future planning, both in terms of the financial planning as well as strategic planning. Mr. Mayor was pretty clear in terms of his department and the need for this resource in order to help with the financial planning going forward. I think that's crucial to our kind of maintaining both our plan, anticipation of what's coming, and if we're going to plan for both providing services and providing affordability or minimizing the tax increase on our residents, having the support for a plan does that. And I know how hard Mr. Mayor and his department have been working with all the catch-up, follow-up, and the sheer amount of information they're providing that hasn't been available in the past, both to the Board of Finance during the budget process, to the Pension Board during their evaluation process, and to different town bodies as we move forward. So there's no question in my mind that the Finance Department has exceeded their output and productivity from past years. This seems to be something that is warranted to help us continue to move in the right direction and meet the financial challenges ahead. So I would be supporting keeping this position in the budget.
Yeah. Just a final comment, and I certainly appreciate your opinions. Again, I just don't think it's the right time to add staff, especially in that area. I believe we have expertise in that department that can do this work and should do this work. Maybe we need some reorganization. And the special project, the 5-year planning, is a very important project. But I think we have the expertise in-house to do that, and I think that's a CFO level work. And I believe we have both the people and the resources and the talent to move ahead and at least get through this year without adding to staff. So thank you for
No,
listening.
thank you. I think that's where the evaluation of that by Mr. Mayor, look at it literally how much output we're getting out of our finance department in so many different areas that we didn't before, and are essential to both the day-to-day operations of this town, as well as responding to certainly an increased level of questions, and warranted questions, not suggesting they're not, from both the RTM as we go through this, as well as the Board of Finance, as well as support for the different functions, a number of which didn't take place before, be it the capital plan that was totally revamped and put together by Mr. Mayor, so that it now is a functioning item that helps us from a planning standpoint, to the pension board support, which was considerably lacking in the past. And I think if you ask anybody on our pension board, they are more than impressed with the level of support in what they're getting, and the different things that we're asking from our finance department as we go through everything from labor negotiations to healthcare evaluations. So with that, if we are ready to vote, and this is on the amendment to reduce this item from the budget, just to be clear. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, the amendment fails. The item is back before us. Are we ready to vote, or is there any further discussion? All in favor of the Finance Department budget?
Aye.
Aye.
Next up is purchasing. Any discussion or adjustments?
No.
No.
All right, all in favor of the Purchasing Department budget?
Aye.
Aye.
The tax assessor. Now, as we discussed yesterday, the bids that came back were higher than the estimated cost for the townwide revaluation. That's approximately $100,000 over the next 2 years. That would mean an adjustment of adding in $50,000 to this year's budget to cover the first half of the cost of that evaluation. May I have a motion to amend the budget?
So moved.
A second.
I'll second.
All right. Any discussion?
Yes, sir. I seconded this motion for discussion purposes, but I definitely plan to vote against it. It's not that the tax revaluation doesn't need to be done, but I'm just not crystal clear yet on what choices we're going to make from a vendor or from a vendor services perspective. Maybe you've seen more on it than I have, but with the information I have to date, and knowing that we're already putting a chunk of money into this year toward a 2-year obligation, that still has a lot of open questions to be answered. Who the exact vendor will be, what level of service we will choose to purchase from them, and then there's also the additional question about what level of interest or what level of involvement, I should say, the Board of Finance will have in the process, which is more known to them than to me at the moment. I just can't get my arms around raising the budget now for this item at this time. So I'm going to vote no against this.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Maybe you talk a little bit more. We didn't have a whole lot of conversation about this yesterday. When we had the presentation from the assessor, it was unclear in terms of the timing, as Selectman Kiley is talking about, and if you can just kind of give us an update in terms of the process and how this adjustment ends up before us today, and the change in information between the budget hearing and today. That
Sure.
would be great.
I'm going to start. I may ask Mr. Mayor to join in based on anything you wish to add to that. But basically, we need to kick this off on July 1st. All right, it's roughly a 2-year process for the reval. That is what typically takes place. In order to do that, we have gone out to bid to a host of vendors. We had a number of responses. Those are being evaluated by a team here led by the tax assessor. The issue is and I think you heard a range of costs that came back. Those dealt with partial data collection, as we've done in the recent past, to full data collection. We're looking at doing full data collection to make sure that for our residents, we make sure that we've taken every step we can in the process to make sure every home is accurately both appraised and assessed, and that we balance the tax burden, if you will, between the homes that are out there. There were a number of questions raised during the last one. We want to make sure that we are taking every step possible to make sure that we get it right. And not only that we demonstrate that we get it right each time through. So As the bids came back, and as we started to go through and evaluate them, we realized that the initial estimate of what we needed and what the tax assessor provided isn't high enough, so that we need to provide this level of cost in there. And again, the question has been asked, that the town attorney has answered. We'll be getting documentation on that, that it is the town tax assessor who's responsible for the appraisal process and the proper appraisal of the property values in this town.
Okay. And I certainly appreciate all those comments, and I agree with them. Our town does deserve, as an exact, as a valuation, for it to be as exact and as accurate as possible. And even within, it's my understanding that even within the full appraisal choice, there's a full, and there's a different type of full. There's two levels of full, right? There's the full, and the full is you go and you knock on every door. And that hasn't been done since 1993, I believe, was the last time that we did a full town-wide, knock on the door, check out the houses, full evaluation. The other kind of full is the kind of full we did last time, with a better result and more accurate results. It's the, when you mail everything out to everyone and everyone returns the cards.
The two terms you're searching for,
Yep.
the knock on every door is called full data collection.
Yep.
The
Okay.
other approach is called partial data collection. The practical reality is that's where you mail out envelopes and get feedback from residents.
Right. So there are some unanswered questions still in my mind, and I would rather address those questions from a financial perspective with complete and full information at a later date. So I will be voting against this amendment.
Okay. And just to be clear, if this amendment isn't passed, we won't have the money in the appraiser's budget. We will not be able to do the full data collection, because we cannot go forward unless we know we have the funding available for that.
That's not my understanding. My understanding is that there's enough money in this budget to kick the process off and have a further discussion later in the process. That's my understanding of the situation.
Yeah, I'm not sure our purchasing department agrees with that,
Okay.
but
Anyway,
So let me ask,
Go
in
ahead.
terms of the way that we have budgeted for it now, as it stands, it
It's an
was
estimate.
a half of the money anticipated or budgeted, our best guess based on the range, and then the other half in the next year. And we haven't actually contracted with a vendor or selected a specific vendor, so we don't know, essentially what kind of down payment in order to be able to start the process, right? We're not paying up front for the whole.
no, we're not paying up front because we're not funding everything up front, but we do need enough money in the budget to complete the first year's worth of work,
Right. So I'm wondering.
or we can't sign the contract and we can't get started on July 1st.
Right. So I respect the outstanding questions. My sense is that in order to do the full data collection, I don't anticipate that the price will come down from what we have. I haven't looked at the bids or seen the bids, but I'm wondering if it makes sense as a compromise to put this into contingency as this moves forward. Then some of those questions can be answered and we can.
Putting it in the
Address it that way.
contingency doesn't solve the problem. The tax assessor needs the funding to proceed, and he needs that funded within his budget. We can always, if we don't use it, we can always take it out of here and put it into contingency. But we need to give the tax assessor the authority to move forward.
I think my sense is I will vote for this today, but I think there's an outstanding question in terms of exactly what does the assessor need in terms of, is it half of the amount, and we're looking at this extra 50,000 because that's what we're clear, we definitely need half the amount, or,
Yeah, it's like any other project we do, we need to have, at least for the year, the amount approved and funded, so that for them to move forward. And this is also the way we have traditionally done the tax appraisal funding. So this is not new. We do this every 5 years now. Historically, before that, we did it a little bit less often. But this is the approach we've taken in the past.
Well, I am going to concur with the comments that both of you have made in terms of the need for the most comprehensive and accurate assessment that we can have. I am going to support this addition just because I want to be certain that we are going to be able to go forward with that process. But ask that some of those questions, as this process moves forward with the other bodies, hopefully we can have some more conversation about that going forward.
All right, thank you. Are we ready to vote on the amendment?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right. The tax collector budget as amended, with the additional $50,000. And Linda, I think that brings that up to,
$1,014,576.
tax assessor budget?
Yes, the assessor's bill.
Sorry. That's 964. So read that again, please.
$1,014,576.
Very good. So the tax assessor's budget as amended stands before us. All those in favor? Aye. All right, thank you. All right, now the tax collector's budget is before us. Any discussion or adjustments? All right, are we ready to vote? All in
Yes.
favor?
Aye.
Next up, information technology. Any discussion or adjustments? Mr. Kylie.
Mr. Kesha, thank you. I move to reduce the IT budget through 3110 by the amount of $47,613, which is mainly comprised of a half a year of a new phone engineer's salary at $33,400, plus life insurance, Social Security, health insurance, retirement, etc. The total cost is $47,613. My rationale for wanting to remove this is, again, it's affordability. What can we do this year? And what can the taxpayers afford to pay and fund in this current year's budget? But beyond that, I know there's a big telephone project that's being discussed, and I have not yet seen that project. I do not know the A's and B's and C's of that project, and there's a lot to be learned about that upcoming town-wide telephone project. And at this point in time, I am just not comfortable adding staff to this department at any level, to be honest with you, but certainly in conjunction with this project until everything is before me. We've seen and heard all the presentations. We've seen and heard all the vendor information and responses, and we move forward with this as a project for our entire town. So the telephone project I do like and I do support. Once I learn more about it, I'm sure I can be more supportive of it. But in the meantime, I think we need to make do with what we have, and I don't think we should be funding positions in this department for this item. Sir.
Is there a second?
Second? Yes.
Any further discussion
Nope,
on the amendment?
That's,
I actually will support this amendment. I think that it's going to be a critical need for the town, and as we call it phone engineer, I think it's communication, and it's a critical function for all of us. But I'm also in favor of looking at the larger term plan, and I concur, Selectman Kylie.
Okay. Just some feedback as we go through this. Given that the project will be presented to the various boards at some point, the concern was looking at certainly how we get staffing on board to do that. Any suggestion on how you'd like to see that come back before this board?
yeah, that's a great question. Well, do we have an anticipated time where we're going to be looking at the big project? Is that like
I
May or
would-
June, or is that too soon?
I would say in the next 6 months certainly, but I don't have a
Next 6
specific.
months?
I haven't
Yeah,
seen it yet,
right.
so I can't say
Right,
exactly.
Right. I mean, I certainly support the town and the Board of Ed having the resources in place for a successful telephony implementation across the entire town. I'm with that 100%.
And
But
if
I
I
just
could-
don't know enough to say yes today to a full-time position.
Yeah, and if I could just emphasize that, this is about the town and the Board of Ed.
Right.
This is a complete telephone system,
Right.
communication system, Selectman McCarthy-Vehy, to your point. So I think that if we're looking at it, when we add a big capital project, if we realize that's going to increase the maintenance and support requirement, if we know that potentially that means adding staff, it's kind of a chicken or egg thing.
It is.
How do you want to see that come back before this board?
I need to think about that just a little bit, but probably as, can we think about that? I mean, maybe later in the current year, we can look at,
We can, voting it down now limits the options going forward, but
Right, well, absolutely.
so the issue,
I'd
that when we
like to
bring
see
it
it all at
back,
once.
that we bring it back with the right pieces.
complete, yeah, that would be my preference. Whether that's in May or September, I don't know. Without holding up the project or hurting it, of course, getting a complete picture of the total resources needed for a successful implementation, today and going forward.
Okay.
And if I may, one of the things that we asked was actually for Mr. Leslie to be here, and I see Nancy here as well, Don and Nancy. If we can maybe hear, if you're willing, not to put you on the spot, but I know Mr. Leslie was anticipating being here today with this budget, and just wondering, what your thoughts are in terms of some of the options for this. And from both of you, please.
Hi, Don Leslie, Director of IT. Thank you for listening.
Sure.
This is I've been trying to get the phone system in for the last 3 years, and it's been delayed and delayed for money reasons and the economy, and I can improve that completely. With the expansion of services that we're trying to perform in the IT department, this is not just a phone engineer, this is a network and phone engineer, because any kind of phone system that we do get in the future is going to ride on the network, and the network's going to be managed and handled very well for that, because especially if we're going to be putting systems in the police department, we need to make sure they're very stable and very secure. The idea of the network engineer is to get the network engineer in just after the RFP process comes back with well, maybe a little bit before that, but right about at the time of the RFP process, so that when the project gets kicked off, he can, one, review the RFPs and make sure that he agrees with them, because that's why we want his expertise. But the other thing is to have him there when the install is done. So I don't have any problem delaying the network engineer, network engineer, until the project, starts off at the RFP process. That's why we're trying to hire a consultant, and that's what's going to come before you first, because the project can be huge, a project can be small. The trick is to get the right match, because if we make it too small, it won't do well for the people, and if we make it too big, we'll be wasting money.
Right.
So that's sort of what I have to say. And then the other point is that I see this as, in the beginning, he's going to be really focusing on the phone system for the first 2 years, because that's going to be the install and stuff like that. But along with that, we're trying to provide more services, like the new website's going up this Friday, and we just converted to Munis, which is using internet services, and we've done some other things too. So it's not just the phone part of it, it's both pieces, and the department used to have a person who managed these things, and they were let go. So I'm sort of asking you to put back the position, not necessarily create a new position here, because the department does need it.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Did you want to say anything on the phone side, on the school side? Okay. Thank you.
Any further discussion or questions? All right. All right, then. Are we ready to vote on the amendment?
Yes.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll go along with you guys on that. Though I would appreciate some feedback in terms of realizing that we're both trying to do a capital project.
Right.
We'll probably have some sort of consulting support component for that evaluation and install, and then at some point need to evaluate, but let's anticipate we will need some sort of network support. How we package that so we don't get hung up in the timing of our budget cycle
Right.
while we're trying to move forward with that.
Yeah, I'm amenable to that.
So, all right, Linda, you have that, right?
Yes, and I just want to make note that a piece of that will reduce the IT budget. A piece of that 47,613 will reduce the health insurance line, and a piece of that will reduce the retiree benefits line. So let me give you what the impact is on information technology. the new recommended information technology budget is reduced by 36,011, leaving you with a new recommended budget of 1,616,531. That's the number you'll be voting on.
Okay, on this sheet, Linda, I thought that all totaled up to 47. Are you saying
It
certain of
does, but
those
certain of those are allocated to different
to other departments?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
We
I
wanted
didn't
to show
catch
the
that.
full
Thank you.
cost
Yep,
of the
no,
IT.
thank you for laying it out that way.
Thank you.
So do we need to go back and make the adjustments to
Human resources, yes.
human resources?
We haven't gotten to retirees benefit yet.
All right.
Okay, can you keep track for us?
Yes, I will tell you.
Thanks.
So I'm going to leave
We
human
don't-
resources on the side at the moment in
Little
case there
open.
anything
Yeah.
else comes
Yeah.
back to that, but we
Right, I will remind
are going to have to go back and open that up.
Sure.
Yes.
Move to reconsider.
Okay,
Um,
absolutely.
All right. And then can we, since we voted on the amendment, can we vote on the information technology budget overall?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Right, oh, yeah.
Go ahead. What? Mr. Leslie?
Do you want to talk about fair TV since it's in my budget?
Mr. Leslie, if you'd let me run the department, that would be good. Run the meeting, thank you. Next up is Fair TV, and that is in IT. Mr. Leslie, thank you for pointing that out. And this would, I guess, actually, let me take it back. We need to have a move to reconsider the IT budget. If we would do that, may I have a motion to reconsider?
So moved.
A second.
Second.
Thank you. The IT budget's being reconsidered, and we have, as we discussed yesterday, motion for consideration to add $24,450 to fees and professional services of Fair TV, item 3110 in IT. May I have motion to amend?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion on the motion?
Just quickly, we talked about this yesterday, and we had is there any new information on this in the last day or two that would affect our thinking on this motion? Please.
Don Leslie, member of the CAC Council. The beginning of the lawsuit, you summed it up very well yesterday. The beginning of the lawsuit, the first judgment came back of the TPUC saying they, against Soundview, the judgment was against Soundview. I don't think it really changes any of the conversation because everybody's expecting Soundview to appeal, but you should know that that just came back the other day. Okay. Anything?
Thank you. Unless there's anything else on that.
No, that's the only thing that really happened.
What we discussed yesterday is just that at the moment, the CAC that is holding this money hasn't agreed to release any of it, pending their decision that the lawsuit has been resolved and won't come back to life. So we may get to revisit this later in the year and see if we can kind of replenish what the town's contribution is. But at this point, we are still not haven't been notified that we're getting any additional money from CAC, the Cable Advisory Commission.
So just so I'm clear, with all the available information we have today, if we do not fund this, then Fair TV only has 6 months of runway. So this guarantees that Fair TV will be in business for 12 months,
It-
or it allows that to happen.
Okay. To at the current level of funding,
Right.
Fair TV would only have 6 months.
Right.
If we gave them only 25 grand, perhaps they might go back and readjust their levels of service, the meetings they cover, to adjust their expenses to a
Right.
lower run rate so they could survive for 12 months, but we would not get all the coverage that we get of the meetings, both on channel 78 and 79, that, for lack of a better term, we've become accustomed to over the
Right.
last few years.
Right. So even though there's potential options that include cuts in services, directionally, my comment's correct? Okay. And the other comment is, there is a chance, even though we have no idea how big or small that chance is, that we could recover some of this down the road if everything fell the right way. Okay? Are those the two salient
With-
points?
Yeah, that is kind of a supposition with no
Yeah.
better impact. I'm making the assumption that if the CIC doesn't need to spend this money on legal services, they would be kind enough to send it along to the town so we can replenish and fund Fair TV and not have to do it out of the town funds.
Thanks.
Any further comments or discussion?
Yeah, I think to reiterate what we said yesterday, I mean, it's frustrating and disappointing that we're not able to get this grant money at this time, but I think besides the fact of what we've been accustomed to, I think we've all three talked about, as have the other boards, the transparency as to allowing other people who can't be here at the meetings to be able to participate. And so while I'm not happy about the process that's happening, I will be supporting this just because I agree with both of you how critical this is, so I'm in favor.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, so the budget as amended is before us. All in favor of the revised budget?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, good. Linda, do you have all that? And again, as noted, that this one impacts just one line item.
All right. Your IT budget total now is $1,640,981. That is the number you'll be voting on.
That's the number we just voted on.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. All right, next up is school security. Oh,
you?
nope, sorry,
Yeah.
I'm getting ahead.
Yeah.
Next up is the Board of Finance. I'm sorry. And that is before us. Any discussion or adjustments to that budget? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Next up is unemployment compensation. Any discussion or adjustments? All in favor?
Aye.
Next up is fire department. Any discussion or adjustments? All in favor?
Aye.
And then police. Now, with police, this is where we have our school security component.
Mm-hmm.
And that would, between retiree benefits, human resources, and police costs in terms of regular payroll, overtime payroll, Social Security, clothing and dry goods, training, and capital. That's a $256,100 adjustment to the budget. May I have a motion to amend? A second?
Second.
All right.
Just to be clear,
The amendment is before us. Go ahead.
yeah, just to be clear on the amendment in total is $256,100, and it covers those three departments that Mr. Tetchell just talked about, police, retiree, and human resources, without breaking them out line by line here. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, and we need to mark this down, because it's another one we're going to have to go back to human resources and adjust.
Right, you'll do that one time.
Correct.
Great.
Correct.
Thank you.
Both adjustments.
We'll reconsider the human resources department when we do that and adjust that line item.
So my question is, what the police department itself, what is the subtotal within the,
Okay, we will be adding 214,418 for a total of 13,438,568.
Any further discussion on school security?
Just really quickly, we've had many great conversations and meetings on this very, very important school security topic. My kudos to the entire teams who have put together the project before us for their comprehensive plan that addresses our needs, protects the children, and I fully support it.
Kristen?
and I think we had a good conversation yesterday, so I would just emphasize those comments from yesterday, and that we'll be supporting this as well.
Yep. And again, As my colleagues mentioned, we do want to thank the Police Department, Chief McNamara, Chris Liddy, Fire Department, especially Fire Marshal Kessler, as well as our Superintendent and the team at the Board of Ed for their work in putting this together. So, let's see, we have a motion on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Aye. All right, the budget as amended is before us. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Animal control. Any discussion or adjustments?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Street lighting. I thought we had,
Do we have something?
I thought we did.
I thought we did too.
Oh, there it is, it's under electricity, okay.
Okay. Oh, it's in two different places. Okay.
All right. So we should, let's take streetlights and electricity here, and we're going to have to come back to DPW and
All right.
electricity.
I'll take the first one.
All
Mr.
right.
Tetro, I move to increase budget 4070, street lighting, in the amount of, I lost my number, I'm sorry,
2243.
$22,483, and that is per the updated information we have for the, per the electricity reconciliation schedule that was done
Is
by
there a
Mike.
second?
I second that motion.
Any further discussion on that amendment? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The streetlight budget as amended stands before us. Any further discussion?
Just a comment, back to the opening comments from Selectman Kiley, this is one of those,
Yeah.
not much choice on
I
this
know.
one, so.
You know, it's a bad guy, right?
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So we have another one to come back to then, right?
Yes,
Okay.
DPW when we
I'll
get to
try to-
that. 50/30.
Coming up, okay.
Next up, hydrant and water. Any discussions or amendments? And it looks like we've got a
We do.
reduction of $40,000 here. Is
Sure.
there,
Motion, sure.
Yes.
I
Yes.
move to reduce budget 4090, hydrants and water services, by the amount of $40,000 per updated information we now have.
okay, is there a second?
Second,
Any further discussion?
happy for it.
All right.
It's a good guy.
Yeah.
All right, all in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
All right, the item as amended stands before us. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Next up is emergency management. Any discussion or amendments?
No.
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Next up is the Emergency Communications Center. Any discussion or amendments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Now we're on to Public Works. First up is Public Works Administration. Any discussion or amendments?
On the admin, no.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Next up is Public Work Operations. Kevin?
Oh, yes. I move to amend Public Works Operations Budget 5030 in the amount of $8,603, and that is another electricity adjustment per the reconciliation schedule provided to us.
A second?
Second,
Any further discussion or amendments on the Public Works Operations budget? All in favor?
aye.
Next up is the Building Department. Any discussion or amendments?
Did we vote on the whole budget or
Oh,
just the
I'm
amendment?
sorry, let's go back and do that then. Let's-
Oh.
Sure. Public Works Operations?
Just may I make a comment?
Go
before
ahead.
I just want to, this is another one of those budgets I just want to highlight in terms of some of the sacrifices and compromises that we make, and particularly with respect to paving, and just recognize that that's something that, you know, we are going to need to continue to keep in the top of our minds as we move forward. But again, it's just another one of those areas where that balance is trying to be achieved, and just want to acknowledge that.
And just to add on to that, I think if you look at the current budget, you can see that we have certainly delayed some of the paving costs in terms of more slowly ramping it up as we move it into the budget. What you don't see quite as obviously is the discussion we had just a month or so back, where we have deferred the equipment replacement to the point that we have to seriously address that. We did that with an item in the non-recurring budget earlier. DPW is putting together a more extensive plan, but there's no way to kind of dodge it. When you look at even a rough outline of the age of our equipment and vehicles in DPW, we have deferred replacement for way too long, and it's something that we have to address as part of the budget going forward. That's why I've asked them to put together a plan. That's why we will go out and present that plan to the various boards in the hope that going forward we will be able to jointly support that plan and keep our DPW equipment in reasonable relationship to its useful life, as opposed to how much older most of it is than what it should be now. Are we ready to vote on Public Works operations?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Now, next up, the Building Department. Any discussion or adjustments to building? Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Next up, engineering. Are we ready to, any discussion or amendments to engineering? Hearing none, are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next up is the Health Department. Any discussion or amendments on the Health Department?
Yes, sir. Can we just have a quick conversation on the new head count requests? I know we had a great presentation from Mr. Cleary on the needs for the additional part-time nurses. You know, there's 3 of them, I believe, in total. There's two health aides and one.
part-time.
All right, thank you.
Part-time health aide.
If you're going to ask some questions,
Do you want to come up? I'm
Sands, if
sorry.
you wouldn't mind coming up,
Thanks.
just so you're near the mic.
So there's the 2 aides and the 1 nurse, and it comes to roughly $58,000. And I'm torn on this one, because, you know, I'm looking at the budget from as keen an eye as I can financially to make sure that we don't spend anything more than we have to this year, yet still provide those services that we've talked about that our people expect throughout the town. So can you just, again, can you help convince me that I should support this? Because I'm still a little torn on if there might be a halfway or a more creative way or a different way of looking at it without falling short on services and without exposing our liabilities too greatly. I'm just kind of still on the fence on this particular $58,000.
Yeah, I think, and it's a fair point. We've waited for years to request this. We've been feeling these pressures for some time now, and it's finally gotten to a point where we feel, based upon experience within the nursing office, between the demands placed upon the nurse for the multiple levels of planning that they have to do, and to, at the same time, care for episodic care and administer medications, we find that we feel we need to improve our performance in that regard, even amongst the nurses being able to find the time to communicate about particular situations of a communication made about one child and communications made with guidance and with parents, and then not even enough time because of the requirement to plan, the requirement to care for children. Their work is very broken up, that we find that there's issues where even the 2 nurses aren't communicating as we desire. And the design here, at the high school level in particular, is to provide this health aide, someone who can, at the lowest cost option possible, lay staff trained in first aid to provide first aid support and clerical support. The initial thought was, well, we should ask for another nurse because they're much more, can perform greater duties, but we said, let's fall back to a realistic request that we think we might actually be able to get approved, and we fell to health aides where they can provide that first aid support to allow the nurses to complete the planning, better communicate, attend other meetings. There's a lot of pressures coming on us, particularly with this new legislation. I mean, there's lawsuits in Westport that went against the school system in terms of that the school system wasn't meeting their requirements, and we feel we need to, at this point, at least ask, because we feel that we need to ensure that we're doing our best to meet those requirements in the minimal request that we can, and that's what we've presented to you, is what we feel is the minimal request to sort of close that gap and get us to where we feel we've reduced the risk that we can perform adequately.
Okay, and I thank you very much for that, and I greatly admire your expertise on this topic, and I'm very sensitive to the needs of the nursing environments within our schools. It's very important, and the legislation does not favor us, the regulations do not favor our town, and there's a lot of potential, bad things that could happen should we not be, properly prepared, and should, we not have enough coverage for all of these children. So I do want to thank you for that. That does help me get off the fence and be supportive of this. And I greatly respect that. So thanks for your time.
May I?
Go ahead.
Thanks for coming back and being here, Sans. Mr. Cleary, I wanted to just confirm, I know the health aides, the plan is for one at each high school. The nurse is floating, or?
The nurse will float between the three middle schools.
The middle schools, okay.
So the nurse
Okay.
brings the nursing level up at the three middle schools
Bravo.
equally. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we have to balance it in terms of, based upon the student population. So not that there would be equal coverage, but based upon student population, that we'll meet the ratios that we desire.
Good. Thanks again.
Sans, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion?
Just a comment, and same thing, the issue of headcount is always a big one that weighs on
Right,
us, and it
right.
definitely weighs on me too. I think when I took the notes from the hearing, the thing that struck me the most was the 40% increase in medication visits. And that one, besides the 5% increase in the regular visits and the meeting planning and all the documentation, that one was probably the one that put me right into that edge, because I know, actually, tomorrow night, there's going to be a forum about prescription drugs, and I understand that especially our high schoolers are at risk there. So we want to, whatever kind of communication, monitoring, help, and assistance that we can continue to give in that regard. I think this is a way to help make sure kids are in the classroom learning, and that's critical as well. And I know that the nurses and the health aides do a lot to get kids back to class. So that's why I'll be supporting this one.
I completely agree, and I think Mr. Cleary made a very strong case that this is an important investment that we make in our town and our schools. So I'm happy to support it.
Any further discussion?
No.
Ready to vote?
Mm-hmm.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, next up, Human and Social Services.
Trying to keep up.
All right. Now, this is another item that we have where we had discussed potential adjustments in terms of the need for a senior center director.
Right.
Do we have any amendments or discussion?
So, question.
Go.
At the table yesterday, we talked about looking at a part-time position, which is
Correct.
something that I would be very much in support of, at least starting with that. And it looks like,
I don't think the worksheet here is updated
Right.
per our
To reflect
conversation
that, right.
yesterday.
Right.
Okay.
So since this is not a formal motion or amendment, this is merely notes or a worksheet. If you care to make an amendment in support of that, you could.
right. So my question actually is, in terms of dollars, to be able to be accurate in that, would 30,000, would that be the proper amount to be funding? So I asked that for Selectmen or Mrs. Gardner.
Yeah, that's what I have in my notes, is putting us in the right ballpark for that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, that's the ballpark figure, and we did discuss this at great length yesterday, and, I'm happy that we were able to come to a reasonable compromise that allows the position to at least be partially filled part-time from day one, which allows the senior center to grow and to develop and to put their planning together and do a lot of other great things for our seniors. So I'm very happy to be a part of that solution. And I think it's also a solution that, as a compromise, runs less risk of endangerment at subsequent boards, and I would be happy to be supportive with them of this, to convince them that it's a great thing to carry forward with and make sure that it makes it through the entire process. So I want to thank everyone for their effort and time on this and their compromised positions.
And I agree, Selectman Kiley. I think that, there are a lot of different conversations that have happened with respect to our senior center and our seniors. And actually, I know going to the open house was
Yeah.
really informative. And I think one of the things about this position that strikes me is that this department is human services. So it is addressing the needs of our seniors and also our human services as a whole. So this allows some pressure to be taken off of the director to be
Sure.
able to do that strategic process, which I actually understand is, getting underway as we speak. So it really allows us to provide more services to our most vulnerable residents, our people with disabilities, and so I think it's one part of the solution, or what we need to do as a town in terms of seniors. I think that we also need to look at our housing options. I know we have the affordable housing workshop tonight, 7 o'clock at the Board of Education office building, just a little commercial.
Little plug.
But because there are multiple levels of needs, we need someone at the senior center. We also need diverse housing stock. We need to allow walkability in communities, all those things that allow our seniors to be able to stay here. But to this motion, I know I'm getting a little off track with that. So have I formally moved that we add $30,000 to this budget to fund a part-time position at the senior center?
Is there a second?
There is a second.
All right, good. And, excuse me, are you,
Just associated FICA number that would go with that.
Okay.
And it's only the major med portion. You would also add 435. 435 as well as the 30,000.
34, 35? So.
30,000 for.
Go ahead, you can amend it.
go ahead,
So
or amend your motion?
To be
Linda, if you could make sure we get it right?
Yes.
30,430.
30,435.
Yep, $30,435. Thank
Second
you.
to that. Yes.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, I think that I'll certainly be supporting this. I see this as one step along the way. It in and of itself is not the answer, but it's another step of improving the services to our seniors, providing them additional support, and showing them that our town cares and wants them to stay here and enjoy the time while they're here. So, are we ready to vote on the amendment?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion as amended stands before us. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Next up, solid waste and recycling. Any discussion or adjustments? No. All in favor?
Aye.
So,
Aye.
so you ready?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, didn't mean to
Just
do
a
that.
quick question.
Go ahead.
The contract and the negotiations is all taken care of elsewhere with the electricity piece, and nothing else is impacted here? for the
Nothing else is
conversation?
impacted here. The contract is not signed yet. That is still going forward.
Okay.
But everything included here is our
confident.
latest available information.
Okay.
What we did is we thought we were negotiating would have the benefit of lower electric rates based on a power purchase agreement. That option went away. So the contract didn't go away,
Okay.
that option went away.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that.
All right, so solid waste and recycling is before us. Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next up, the library. Any discussion or amendments? Are we ready to vote?
Mhm.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next up, Penfield Pavilion Complex. Any adjustments or discussion?
No adjustments, but just a quick comment and I wanted to publicly thank Jerry Lombardo for the presentations he gave us last week on the financial performance of the Parks and Recreation Department and his individual components, the golf courses, the rec center, et cetera. Did a great job of providing good information that was easy to understand, made sense both individually and globally. and it was a good piece of reporting.
Yep.
All right, I will pass your kind words along.
You got it.
And mine as well, I agree.
All right.
Very
Back to
helpful.
Penfield Pavilion. Any further discussion, or are we ready to vote?
Mhm.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Next up, Parks and Recreation. Any further discussion or amendments? Are we ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Waterfront and Marina. Any discussion or amendments? Ready to vote?
Mhm.
All in favor?
Aye.
The Carl J. Dickman Golf Course. Any adjustments or amendments? Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
The H. Smith Richardson Golf Course. Any adjustments or discussion? Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, okay, that brings an end to town operations. Next up is the Board of Education.
Would it make sense for us to wrap up these little other items, or do you want to continue through? And I wanted to look at contingency at one point, too.
We're going to come back to contingency, that's still on the
After we
side
do the
here.
Board of Ed? Okay,
After we do that, we've got the Board of Ed, retiree benefits, and debt service
got it.
to look at. And since we're at the Board of Ed,
Great.
and that's before us, and we do have to reconsider human services, human resources to go back and adjust healthcare costs
Right. Okay.
throughout.
Okay.
Yep, we're going to come back to contingency. No, we're going to come back to contingency. With respect to, Mr. Mayor, if I could ask, Board of Ed currently has a shortfall in anticipation in the internal service fund and their health insurance component, as you've described. And shortfall may be too strong a word, but we're basically using up our reserve and our RB&R by the end of 2015. If we- Go ahead. And if you're going to do it, you might need to do it from the podium. And Bob, where I'm going, I'm going to ask, what moves we have to make if we're going to take 500 grand from bond premium and put it into the internal service fund. And whether, basically, if we're going to move some portion of the bond premium that we have reserved for next year, move it into the internal service fund in the Board of Ed healthcare component to help address that shortfall. Do we do that separately? Do we do that in the Board of Ed line item? How do we make that happen appropriately?
Just recap, projection for the internal service fund. The Board of Ed's portion, the medical portion of the internal service fund, this Board of Ed's is projected to be their coverage of the reserve expected to be zero.
At the end of June 30th, 2015.
Actually, a little less than zero. If the choice is to put money into the Board of Ed, there's two choices. One is to just build up the internal service fund globally in the town, or two, to transfer money into the Board of Ed. Focusing on transfer money into the Board of Ed, there'd be two motions. Would be to actually, that's a good question. One motion would be to, I'm trying to figure out how to do yours. So the motion would
If
be-
I might suggest, and then
Yeah.
tell me where I may be off.
Right.
Since bond premium money can only be used for debt service, we need to move it from bond premium into debt service in the town.
Right.
We would then need to move it from debt service in the town into the Board of Ed,
Right.
That makes sense.
and potentially move it from debt service in the town to the Board of Ed first, and then move it in to cover that. Very clear that transactions and not,
Thank you.
Good answer, huh?
you've taught me well. Is that
No, that's
that appropriate?
Right.
Yeah.
Didn't bring my cheat sheet, but that's
Okay.
it.
So, we would actually need, if we're going to do that as per that, we probably need to bring up debt service next. Move money from debt service, out of debt service, into the Board of Ed, and then move the bond premium money into debt service. And Linda, can we move items from one department to another in this process? Do we do it as half transactions, or can we do it as a full transaction? Did my question make sense?
You're going, but you're going to reduce debt service, right, or 10030,
Yeah.
by the amount that you want to fund the Board of Ed by, would be the first action.
Now, what I'm trying to do is get I guess the whole budget's before us, so we can we've got to do it in 2 steps, but we can adjust line items even though we're looking at that, if that's permissible with my colleagues.
I believe so.
All right.
Sure.
So then, just to get an item before us, I move that we remove $500,000 from debt service and move that to the Board of Education line. We are,
I'm sorry.
thank you. And that's a second by Mr. Kiley.
Sorry.
If I can just kind of continue on with that, speaking to the Board of Ed representatives in the room, while you have the autonomy and authority to spend that however you wish, we are very specifically asking that you convey to the Board of Ed, who makes the final decision, that it is our strong recommendation that the town is stepping in to help out here, since we are all one town, and that reduces the urgency for the Board of Ed to replenish that in this year, and that would hopefully allow you to continue with the programs as planned. We will need to have a discussion in fairly short order over the next on how to fully address the shortfall on this and how we can explain to the rating agencies what our plan is in place to get this back. I'll follow up with Dr. Title and Phil Dwyer, so we can have a more specific conversation about that. But and I guess this is all kind of part of the motion, so that we can vote on this and reinforce it if you're comfortable with that. That what we want to do is take action right now to help address this, so that the rating agencies know that we are taking steps. We realize it's a shortfall. We have to take it. We realize that we can't just go to the Board of Ed and say, readjust your budget, because it's too big a number to do that with. So we're putting $500,000 in, and we're basically taking it out of bond premium for next year. So everybody's clear, what we're doing is we just raise taxes next year about $500,000. We were going to use this to keep debt service down next year. We're going to have to increase debt service to do that. There's no free lunch. We can do this now. We have the capability of doing it now. It addresses a need for the Board of Education now. That's the reason we're doing this. We are going to need to help over the long term, but I believe it buys the Board of Ed time to come up with a more planned response over the next few years to address this. So it keeps the Board of Ed from being in a situation where they have to address this all at once. It shows the rating agencies that we're taking action, and I believe that addresses both a short and long-term need.
Well, without being
Any further discussion?
Well, without being repetitive, I agree with what you just said. Thank you for summarizing that. And, the 2 comments, or the 3 comments I will make is we certainly do want to help, and this is our effort to do that, and we're happy to participate at that level. We just want to make sure that Mr. Tetro's message is well received at the Board of Education, what the intention is and what the plan is, and we're happy to work with you on whatever that longer-term strategy needs to be, because this doesn't fix the problem, this alleviates it to some degree. But there's still a problem there, and there's still work to be done, and we're still your partner, so that's it.
And I would just add, yeah, we are partners. I think we're all together on this in terms of the fact that we have an obligation to honor these commitments, much as we do with our other financial commitments, and when we look at pension and OPEB and all those things. And I actually just wonder, in terms of furthering this conversation, recognizing kind of the size of this, and kind of the concern that I have is that we know the board and town together need to address this. What I don't want to see happen is our educational programming be impacted by this. And one of the additional compromises, though it wouldn't be a motion, but I'm bringing it up here as part of this conversation, would be to suggest that, again, a recommendation to the board, who will have to make that decision, that the funding that was allocated for school security, do you want to save this
If
for
I
the...
could, I think it would be good, just in terms of clarity of minutes and discussion, if we finish the
Okay.
adjustments here, and then
I'll
come
hold
back
on to
to
that.
your point, if that's okay with you.
Sure. I certainly am in support of this
Okay.
motion in terms of moving the debt service in and, or the bond premium in.
Well, in this
and
case, just to be
out of-
clear on the motion, what we're doing is taking $500,000 from debt service, adding that to the Board of Education budget, with a request that they apply that to the health insurance, the funding that goes into the internal service fund.
I'm good.
Okay?
Good.
All right. Are we ready to vote on that amendment?
Yes.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Now, because the town has a required amount of debt service to pay, we cannot decide to just not pay that. It's a little bit like deciding not to make your mortgage payment. There are serious consequences. We now have a $500,000 hole in the fiscal 15 debt service payment. In order to fill that hole, I'd like to make a motion that we take a $500,000 out of our bond premium reserve and apply it towards debt service in fiscal 15.
Second.
All right, thank you. What that does is we've done that in two separate steps, so the audit trail is clear, if you will. And this second one is purely, literally taking money that we reserve next year for debt service and moving it into this year. For anybody following along, we did get roughly a $3 million bond premium. We used part of it in fiscal 14, $1 million. We plan to use a third of it in fiscal 15, $1 million, and a third of it in fiscal 16, $1 million. We have just taken $500,000 out of the fiscal 16 component, moved it into fiscal 15, so we're using up $1.5 million of that. That's all okay. The only requirement is that we use it within 3 years. We had planned to use it evenly. We are just modifying that approach a bit. Any further discussion on the move from bond premium in fiscal 16 into this year's budget?
Just a point of clarification. These two motions, these two transactions have a zero net impact on the current budget, or on the budget that we are considering from an expense and a tax perspective.
There's no tax impact in fiscal 15.
Right, but-
In essence, we'll pay for that. The tax impact will be in
Right.
fiscal 16.
Right, we're pulling $500,000 from the next year, which we will need to deal with at a later date.
Correct.
Thank you, sir.
Any other comments or discussion?
No?
Are we ready to vote on the Second Amendment?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
See that? We're staying around for it. All right, now, we've made those issues. Are we,
Do we want to finish?
do we want to vote on, we've got debt service, Board of Ed, and retiree benefits. Any preference in which we take those?
Debt service is open. You want to just knock that
All right.
off?
The debt service number is then before us. Any further discussion or amendments?
So it's amended
And-
twice, but the number remains the same.
Right, no change.
Got it. No.
Any further discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
So debt service is done. Retiree benefits. Any further discussion or adjustments?
Did we have some from earlier for
Right.
that?
Oh, we did.
Yes.
We did.
Thank you.
All right.
You have two adjustments that you, in fact, voted. 1,927 reduction for the elimination of the IT person, and an addition of 730 for,
Can somebody repeat what she says, just
Yeah, this is at the senior center money, so that too, that is that. You have the security plus 410.
hold on, let me just get back to my notes. When you remove the IT person, there was a reduction of 1,927. And the school security was an add of 730. The net effect is a reduction in that account of 1,197. The new number for that budget is 16,803,205.
I'll move that number.
All right, a second?
I'll second that.
All right, any further discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The Board of Ed,
Okay.
any
May I?
discussion? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, thank you. So back to what I was suggesting before. I think one of the things that concerns me is, that we've talked all along throughout this conversation about balance, and as the first selectman said, it was $3 million that came from different departments' requests, 800,000 came from the Board of Education request. And we know that they're also facing this situation that we've just put the $500,000 back in an effort, rather than taking any more money out of that bond premium or having, supported a motion that might have been higher from that. One of my thoughts was to suggest or have a sense of this body that with that money that was allocated within the Board of Ed budget for capital school security improvements, that money also be used to address the health insurance situation and be pulled out with the understanding that it would be then taken into account with a full town and Board of Ed capital request that will we anticipate will come forward as this conversation moves forward. So again, what that does is in effect allow the board to make use of those funds to help address that situation, getting them just a little bit closer to being able to meet the IBNR. And I think, we'll have to have ongoing conversations, just as I think the comments at the Board of Finance, and I know that the Board of Finance will, as we look forward to addressing this, it's an ongoing conversation. It has been a conversation over years, but I just wanted to get a sense from the two of you if that might be something that you would consider. Again, it's not a motion because it's not something that we can request or I don't want to say force upon the Board of Ed. That would have to be a decision that would be made at their table. But it was a thought as another way to be able to address this hole.
So if I can clarify, please? You're suggesting that we don't reduce the budget by 160. You're suggesting that we advise him to earmark that money not for the school security, but toward the health insurance shortfall,
Correct.
as a suggestion. Is that
Correct.
Is that what you're saying? Okay.
And furthermore, with the understanding that that 160 would then be, since those are earmarked for capital type projects, that would then be put together with a town project and have those, if possible, it may not timing-wise work out that way, but essentially that those could be capital improvements.
Yeah.
I think,
Go ahead.
just to clarify, just to confirm my understanding, we had talked as part of our comprehensive school security program, we have added, in essence, labor dollars in terms of police support in the current budget. Dr. Tyler had earmarked,
Sorry.
you got one bad arm, let's not
I
go for two.
know. Don't get hurt.
Dr. Title had pointed out that he put a placeholder, $160,000 in the Board of Ed budget for what I'll call facilities improvements related to security specifically.
Correct.
I believe what
That's-
Selectman McCarthy-Vahey is saying is that
Right.
we have, as part of that comprehensive plan, we have some facilities improvements that are going to be recommended as part of the plan that the school, through Dr. Title, police and fire, and the town are going to recommend to school facilities. What we have included so far certainly does not finish the job. It's a step in that direction. When we go to add in some additional school facility improvements, we would put the 160 for those and include what we plan to spend that on in that overall package. So in essence, we're moving it out of the operating budget, put it to most likely non-recurring, coming down the road, and that use the 160 to address an immediate need in terms of the health insurance fund, the internal service fund, right now. So that then would increase that from 500 to 160 as a supplemental contribution, assuming the Board of Ed agrees to all of this, because we can't, again, we are
Right.
asking their support, certainly not directing them what to do. But that would let us, again, look better for the rating agencies in terms of the steps we're taking immediately to address the financial shortfall, and also providing a recovery plan on the facilities piece coming up later.
Okay, thank you for that.
Is that,
No, that helps clarify what you guys are saying, so I
Is
guess
that-
it,
just,
Mhm,
Kristen,
no,
is that, did I
thank you.
capture your thought
Right.
correct?
Yes.
And perhaps the to-do coming out of that, with your support, would be sending a letter to the Board of Ed, Board of Finance, and RTM, letting them know what we will recommend or suggest happens with this. And hopefully that has the support of the other boards going through.
okay. All right, so just stepping back for a minute, looking at the 160, which is earmarked, it's a placeholder, I get all of that. It's earmarked for physical improvements within the buildings as part of the overall security project.
Correct.
And that's the 265 that we approved on the police side, plus this 160, roughly $425,000 in total,
Yeah, 256 plus.
the 160,
Yeah.
whatever that,
Right, close enough.
220 or so, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess my first question would be, how can we give assurances to the Board of Education that if they were to consider doing this, that somebody is going to be moving ahead with the bond appropriation to cover the 160? Because my concern is, first I'm hearing of this, is that the work that's anticipated as part of the 160 doesn't get done for some reason because there's no money to do it. And I don't want to put them in that position. If there's a way to get that done and help this other issue, I'm good with that. But I don't know how we can sit here at this moment and give them assurances, let alone direction, on how to accomplish those things. So I need help getting comfortable with that.
Well, I think that's fair, because frankly, what I'm suggesting is that would become perhaps part of a non-recurring item, which would clearly have to pass through each of the town bodies, right, in terms of an approval process. So I can't sit here and say I can guarantee that, or we can't sit here and say together
Right.
that we can guarantee that, because any of those non-reoccurring projects would have to go through the whole process and
Right,
be
right.
supported by all of the bodies.
Right.
So
Right.
that's, I mean, just to honestly answer that,
Right.
I think, go ahead,
Well, I think that if we take a look at the timing involved in this,
Yeah.
all right, that the 160, that we're asking the Board of Ed to put into, guys, if we could keep it a little lower, please. The 160 that we're asking the Board of Ed to use, they have until June 30th, 2015 to make that decision.
Correct.
Consequently, we have time between now and then to look at the non-recurring project. Dr. Title is intimately involved in that, and will know if the money that we plan to replace that 160 with gets passed within the non-recurring project or additional funding project. If it doesn't, then the Board of Ed can then proceed with the 160 as they plan. If it does, then that 160 can be applied to the health insurance shortfall. So I think the timing of these allows, because we're planning for next year's expenditures, not this year, the non-recurring piece happens outside the budget cycle. The 160 doesn't need to be applied to the health insurance side on day one, I don't believe. It doesn't, we have,
Yeah.
let me paraphrase. The Board of Ed has the entire year of fiscal 2015 to apply that to that
Right.
account.
Right.
Does that
Okay.
help?
No, that helps a lot, thank you. And normally, I wouldn't be overly concerned of $160,000 across a budget that large, but specifically in this case, I just want to make sure that whatever we do, whatever we decide, doesn't handicap our school system from being able to proceed ahead and implement the school security project that I believe everyone I've talked to is supportive of, including myself. So if there's a way to alleviate the IBNR issue and ensure that this project can move ahead in its entirety or as it is intended to be, then I would be okay with that, as long as the three of us can at least agree that we would entertain whatever further actions would need to take place to facilitate that at some time.
Yeah, the 160 couldn't be spent until July 1st in any event.
Understood.
So we have some time between now and then. If it's not spent right away in holding it, that provides the time cushion, if you will.
Right.
Because we're not disagreeing over the dollar amounts, we're just concerned about the commitments.
Sure.
That we have the timing to allow. So I think it can work out, as long as everybody stays in good communication. I think this is one of the, what I'll call improvements in the relationship between the town and the Board of Ed
Sure.
over the last few years. Dr. Entitle and I have worked very hard to make sure that we're all on the same page, that's open communication back and forth. And I think that allows for this to happen. I think a letter to the Board of Ed, Board of Finance, RTM, kind of laying this out, allows for them to understand what our suggestion is, for lack of a better term. Now, that the 500,000 piece is a little bit separate, because we in essence are transferring that over. We're transferring the bond premium in. That's kind of one piece. The 160 takes a little bit more coordination.
Right.
And might be a little bit separate at that point, but.
And I think maybe this, put a different way, what I'm suggesting is if the three of us agree that we are making a promise and a commitment to take that and move forward with it as a separate item, but again, I can't make that promise on behalf of the Board of Finance or the RTM, and I'm not trying to do so, recognizing that this is the beginning of the budget process. But simply would the three of us, as the first group to discuss the budget, think that that might be another way to help achieve some relief in that fund and to address that commitment.
Okay. Well, again, and I appreciate your comments, is, again, as long as the three of us are committed to see the project through, so that it gets done
Yes.
to the level that everyone is expecting it to be done, and it performs, and as long as we will document it and communicate that, I don't see any issue why, I don't see a reason why we can't make this recommendation and make this commitment.
So, if I may, since this was kind of a, as the process evolves, brainstorm, I wondered if, I see Mr. Cullen in the room, if we could ask, if I could ask through you, if your comfort level, and I certainly know that the Board of Education, I see Mrs. Gerber back there, and I know you can't speak for the board, again, recognizing the authority of the board, but just wondering from your perspective, your thoughts on this.
Tom Cullen, Director of Operations. As you were talking about this, my only concern would be that we would be to do this summer in the schools. It's difficult to do this kind of work when students are in the school building. So we'd be looking for approval on our budget and on the security piece, hopefully in late May, early June, and be able to start work as soon as school got out. So whether that's with the 160,000 that's in our budget, or it's
Some other number.
some other number, we'd like to do it this summer.
Yeah, I think that definitely puts the pressure on you, working with Dr. Title, Chief McNamara, to get a proposal put together that addresses the components you want, that fits it within this, so that money can either be used or not. If not, then it goes back to pulling it out of your operating budget, if I'm stating that clearly. Right? 'Cause
I get it.
But I think that we need to get to work on getting the security component, the facilities improvements, at least done in part, in terms of the work that you'd like to see completed this summer. Correct.
Thank you.
So the additional comment I would make is us committing to that time frame as well.
Yep.
If all of that happens, then I
Right.
think that this is a reasonable solution to get everything done and address part of the IBNR issue as well, and work together, so,
That'd be great.
okay.
Okay, thank you.
That being said, which doesn't take a vote or a specific amendment, we are back on, I believe, the Board of Ed.
We are.
Piece. That has been increased by 500 grand, if I'm correct, Linda? Are we ready to vote on the Board of Ed budget as amended?
We got a couple quick comments. Again, thanks to everyone for their work on the Board of Education budget. I know it's a lot of work, and we certainly appreciate all the presentations and the effort. My thought on the Board of Education in general, inclusive of this $500,000, it doesn't change how I'm viewing things, because I'm viewing the 500, or even in theory, the 660, as a means to, head off a problem that we believe is coming in the next 6 to 12 months on the healthcare. But putting the healthcare issue aside, just for a moment, the budget itself, from what I can read of the budget, the education budget that I see this year has been cut internally in places where I think we're getting close to the bone from a providing quality of educational services perspective. There's about $800K off the number that first came before everyone. And from my perspective, the $804,000, that's where I think it should leave this board. Is that the level that it came to us, with this $500,000 addition for the healthcare? The way I look at it, big picture is, there's a large healthcare issue out there, and this budget already has its back up against the wall to try to deal with that over the course of the next year or 2 years to see how we can work our way out of this hole, whether claims get better. We don't know what's going to happen. But I think we're already at a place now where it's been vetted, it's been explained, it's reasonable, it makes sense. I think it provides the services that our schools need and that our townspeople are used to having and are requesting of us to provide for them. And my plan is to support the budget with this amendment as it came before us today.
And I would concur with Selectman Kiley. I think that further cuts to this budget really risk some structural changes that could be forced upon a system that's not prepared to deal with that at this point or in agreement with that action. And I agree that over the course of time, we've seen the budgeting process, the explanations, as Selectman Kiley said, but also the kind of improvement in some of the budgeting to be more realistic about what the actuals are reflecting, and I'm thinking about a few different accounts. So I definitely agree with Selectman Kiley's remarks, and I will be supporting this budget throughout the process.
All right. Good. I think that obviously there's been a series of steps here between the special ed shortfall in the current year, where the Board of Ed and the town worked together to patch a $1.5 million hole, to working together on the health insurance number for next year, where, again, I think this demonstrates we're working together. And certainly going back to when I first got involved in the RTM and Board of Finance, there was always a certain amount of tension between the Board of Ed and the town, and I think this goes a long way to taking steps that show this really is one town, this really is one partnership in terms of trying to look at things jointly and address the needs of the town overall. So I compliment my colleagues on certainly looking at it that way, and I think this is another step that demonstrates that we're all trying to do what's best for the town, both financially as well as quality of services and quality of education provided. So unless there's any further discussion, are we ready to vote on the Board of Ed line item?
Yes.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Now, we need to go back to...
Contingency.
Contingency.
Yeah.
And just so we're clear, we'll go back to contingency, deal with that. We will come back and then vote overall on the town expenditures, because we've already voted on revenues.
Right.
And then we'll come back to WPCA.
Got it.
Everybody okay?
Yep. So may I ask a question to Mrs. Gardner? Can you please, inclusive of everything we've done today, I know we walked in this room at X dollars, and we walk in this room at an expense increase of 2.67. Is that correct? So can you give me
That had been the tax increase.
the tax increase? I'm sorry.
Budget increase is different.
Budget Got increase it. Is different.
Collection rates and other things.
Thank you.
Right.
So can you update those two numbers for me as we sit here?
I can tell you what impact you had on the budget. The budget increase, the first selectman's budget increase was 2.96. With your actions today on the town piece and the Board of Ed piece, It is a budget increase of 2.98. And I can give you the actual numbers.
So, which-
That's the budget.
Going up more than
Than the tax rate.
increase.
Got it.
Uh,
So that's the number
Yeah.
I'm most interested in, is the tax increase percentage, what was 2.67 when we walked in.
Now, just some rough numbers for what, and Ms. Gardner, maybe you can back this up. I had us, with some initial calculations, at roughly a $90,000 increase, based on the adjustments we laid out here. That was before the reduction of roughly $48,000 in the IT position. So I would see that as roughly a plus $40,000 overall,
Right, you actually added to the budget 50,518.
okay?
You added to the revenue 509.
Right.
That nets out 40. 42,009.
The number I was referencing is the net number after,
Yeah, okay, I got
Is
it.
the increase.
The net.
and because the 500,000 comes from non-tax revenue, what we just referenced here are those items
Right.
that impact tax revenue in the
Mhm.
fiscal 15 budget.
Okay,
Is that fair?
yep. So that 2.67 tax rate increase is going to nudge up a smidge, or will it not? It's not.
It's not going to
jump
affect
the
it
next
enough
level.
to, it's not going to affect it
It's
enough
not
to
going to have
jump
an
it.
impact on.
You are
this.
still at
It-
2.67.
It's roughly at 2.67.
Roughly.
That's what it rounds to, okay. So with that said, I do want to go back to a lot of the comments everyone has made here about affordability. And we have a great town. Fairfield is a wonderful place to live, to grow up, to raise a family, to educate your kids. And we have the best services in public safety that, you can imagine. And we get a lot of great value for our money. The other side of the coin is, expenses go up every year. Some are not controllable. In fact, a good chunk of them are not controllable. A small chunk of it is controllable, and we do our best to manage those pieces and keep them lean while still providing the quality services that everyone in this town requires and requests of us. So from that perspective, I think we've done a good job at balancing out, both sides of that equation. I'm still not pleased that we're above the tax increase rate that we had last year, and I'm not pleased, even though it's only up $40,000, I'm not pleased that we're up any dollars from where we walked in this room. So I would like to make a motion. Roughly, and Bob, you can keep me honest on the math. If I'm just looking at rough math, and I'm doing very rough, $275 million, 1% would be $2.75 million. 1/10 of 1% would be 275 grand, just in rough numbers. Is that fair to say? So I would like to make a reduction to contingency in the amount of $275,000, and that'll be a motion that I'm making, to get that 2.67 down below 2.6. It would take it down to 2.57, and I think, based on what I know, I think there's a little room in contingency. I hate to go there because it's a place that we like to protect and keep for a rainy day. We have a bit more there this year than in previous years, but I would get a lot more comfortable, making the case that we're keeping our town affordable and doing everything we can to reduce our tax rate and our tax burden if we could get support for pulling contingency down by $275,000, which would get us, by my rough math, down to about 2.56 versus the 2.67 that we're at, give or take 0.01%. So that is a motion to reduce contingency by $275,000.
All right, is there a second?
And I'll second for discussion.
Any further discussion?
I just think it's important, to walk away from this table at a lower expense and tax rate than we walked in this room. I think we've done a good job at working together, all boards, commissions, town members, and bodies. And I think there's a little bit more work to do, and I think it's a reasonable request. I think there's room in contingency, and I would ask your support to push this number down by a little bit. Thank you.
Do some thoughts, or I'll be happy to go if you don't.
If you go ahead, and then I may have a question.
Yeah, that's that fine line.
It's
That's
tight,
that
I know,
balance.
I know, I know.
I totally sympathize with your concept and where you're trying to get us to go. And that's, the balance is how low can you go and at what point and at what risk do you take? Certainly, we know, as we've experienced this year, where we had to come up, the town had to come up with $500,000 in the last 4 months to help out fill a hole. We've seen that snow budgets can certainly push us to the edge with both salt pavements and paving or plowing needs. We can certainly look at, as we cut in other areas, we've progressively gone through with the departments, and I would point out that I removed $3 million in department requests before it got to this board. So there have been major efforts to get this budget to a point that provides better value than any other tax increase in Fairfield County. So I just, and I know we've gone back and adjusted contingency in each of the last 2 years. And each time we do that, what I'm worried is it gets too easy to do. Contingency is something that I think we're still a little bit light on. I'd actually like to see it get a little bit more of a comfort zone. If we ever don't spend contingency, it goes into surplus. It helps improve our unassigned fund balance, which makes us financially stronger. So the worst case is we don't spend it, and it helps address one of our strategic financial opportunities for improvement. If we do need to spend it, boy, it's awfully good to have it here so we don't have to go back and start slashing. And as we saw this year, when we needed $500,000, we had to cut library books. We had to cut DPW equipment purchases. We had to go back to a number of areas where we know we don't want to cut those things, but we had to do it because the money wasn't going to be there if we're going to find $500,000. If you try and do that on day one of the budget year, you can make much more intelligent decisions. If you have to find it halfway through or 3/4 of the way through the year, you're literally going to what hasn't been spent and saying, don't spend that. That's not a strategic decision, that's a reactionary. So I really do sympathize with what you're trying to do, and I applaud the goal. I just have trouble supporting it when, for the long run, what we're doing, I think, provides the most support. And certainly looking at next year, if we're able to keep this number and roll it forward, we have just reduced our potential next year by $500,000 in use of the bond premium, so we know we won't be able to get that number down next year. So that's kind of a multi-year answer to my concern over both in terms of our experience this year and looking forward to fiscal 15 and beyond, that I think that it's important that we have a strong contingency amount so that support the unknown as we strip out more and more of the fudge factor in our department budgets. But, Kristen?
Go ahead.
So question.
Sure.
There was conversation about contingency and at the joint hearings, and my understanding is that there was a request for some further conversation regarding that from the Board of Finance. And but that hasn't happened as far as I'm aware. The group has not had the opportunity. We just finished our joint hearings. They met together in a public session on the 27th. So my concern, I think, if I'm understanding then, there's still kind of some conversation that people would like to have. So my concern with this, and I also applaud the effort and the thought of that as well, is that I would probably prefer to see that conversation be able to happen before supporting a motion like this. Obviously, I won't have the chance to support it if it were done today, and then it moves on to the Board of Finance, but this is probably one I'd like to leave alone and let that conversation occur at that level with whatever other information is being sought and provided.
Okay. Well, I certainly thank both of you for your comments. Just a quick question on the contingency itself. I know there's a lot of estimate accounting within that contingency line. You know, there's a lot of different things in there, but roughly, what is the unassigned amount that's in there? The true contingency, you know, that we don't have earmarked, roughly. I know it's roughly, why don't you answer?
Yeah, Mr. I appreciate where you're going and trying to get to. Over the last few years, we have identified that because there are contract reserve amounts in the contingency,
Understood.
that's something that we would discuss in private executive session, so as not to break out those individual components.
I understand that.
And
That's-
certainly, we had one session, we laid that out, so you had a chance to see all that
I did.
at one point, so I'm
I
not quite
did.
sure.
Well, I just want to confirm that my general understanding, because some of those pieces of contingency are sensitive and are not for public consumption, I get all of that. But there is part of that contingency account that is a general contingency. And without revealing anything that's, you know, executive session, you know, material, we've been in that general contingency range of 200, call it, give or take, in general, for a number of years. That's a fair statement, is it not?
Yes.
It's my understanding from looking at the materials that the general contingency component in this budget is a multiple of that. And look at, it's a $275 million budget, give or take some change. And I understand that having a contingency of $200,000 in the corporate world would never be enough money. I understand that. You should be you should be some percentage of your budget. You know, maybe you're $3 million bucks just on general. If you were running a company and you had a budget that was this tight, you would want to have more money in there than we've ever had in there. I get all of that. I'm sensitive to that. But it's my understanding that our general bucket this year is significantly higher than it has been. So I'm looking at that as maybe being somewhat available to help offset this tax increase without revealing it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying
I
that.
think you're getting on thin ice, Mr. Kyle. I just would, we're going to have that session again with the Board of Finance.
Okay.
It's something that regardless of what we do here, the Board of Finance has the option to adjust as they see fit.
Understood.
All right, so it asks that we kind of not, you're going down a path that we shouldn't go down, or at some point.
Well,
it's-
I'm being pretty general about it. I'm not being too specific. Bob's laughing. Well, if you
We'll-
support the motion, then we can stop the conversation.
Yep. All right, do you want to have, is that a motion for a vote? Are you calling the question?
Well, I think the discussion's been had, so, yeah, the motion's on the
Okay.
floor, so
Ready
the
to
motion's for a reduction to 275.
All right, and that's been properly seconded, right?
I believe so.
So we're talking
Yeah.
about the
I
amendment.
second.
Yes,
Talking about the
yeah,
amendment.
you got it.
seconded that.
All right?
Yeah.
All in favor? Okay, all opposed?
Okay.
But, so that addresses that question on contingency. Contingency is before us. Are we, any further discussion? Are we ready to vote? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
So that leaves contingency. What I'd suggest, actually based on, is why don't we go to WPCA and then we can vote on the entire budget, including WPCA,
All right.
as our final motion, if that sounds, we'll vote on WPCA, then we'll vote on everything combined, if that is okay.
Do you have an adjustment here?
So let's look at WPCA before us. There were 4 adjustments in WPCA. as we discussed yesterday. May I have a motion to adjust those? Health insurance for actives, utilities, electric, fees and professional services, and information technology.
Mike, I don't know if you want to address the transfer ones. Those are grouped with a bunch of other transfers for the that the Board of Finance specifically asked for.
Yeah, Linda, if you didn't put it on the sheet, Linda, I don't see them anywhere, so
Right.
happy to consider.
No, the last two are going to be addressed at the Board of Finance, is what I'm saying. There's no need for you to address those. They're moving accounts to create a new account. So you don't need to vote those right now.
Okay, the 2,000 that nets out to zero?
Right,
All right.
right,
So then we can address the health insurance actives and utilities electric,
yes.
which together net out to increase in WPCA budget of $13,519.
Correct.
Can I have a motion to amend?
So moved.
A second?
Second?
All right, any further discussion on the WPCA? And again, just to clarify, this is an account that is supported by the sewer use fees, and that's separate billing from the tax revenue, so this does not impact the tax rate. Any further discussion there? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
So those are all individually done. We need to come back and have a motion overall to accept the budget as presented in all of this. This is also an opportunity for any final comments. So would either of my colleagues like to add some comments?
Go ahead, I'll defer to Selectman Kylie.
Kevin? go
Okay,
ahead.
sure. Well, we're at the end of a long process, and once again, big thanks to everyone involved, every department head, manager, commissioner and board, and employee of both the town side and the Board of Ed side. You know, we've had some differences along the way on various items, but I believe we dealt with them fairly and professionally, so I feel really good about that. There's more work to be done in the process, but I think overall, this is a budget that is a good balance of services required and expected by our citizens and our ability to pay. I would like for it to be lower and try to get it a bit lower. Not quite as low as I wanted to get it, but not low, but not, it's not high enough where I'm gonna, you know, not vote for it and not support it. I don't think that would be a productive vote on my behalf. So I plan to support this budget, and I just want to thank everyone, you know, the finance department especially, for all their work and the information and the upgraded level of communication and information that we've seen in the past year or two. So I certainly appreciate that.
Thank you. Kristen?
Well said, and I'm going to read from notes since I'm not
Oh, you
feeling
got notes?
I'm not as eloquent today as Selectman Kylie, but, and I just want to echo those thanks. Each year, our town, like other towns and cities in Connecticut, goes through an arduous process trying to set priorities for spending that we've talked about that meet the needs, resources, and wishes of our residents. The process culminates in our voting beginning today with our vote here at the Board of Selectmen. What's been clear to me throughout this process, evidenced by the tremendous turnout Saturday and the emails that Selectman Kylie and the First Selectman have talked about, is that the people of Fairfield are passionate about our community and want it to thrive. I've approached this process, including the votes today, with a number of values in mind. I believe in the strength of our community, our diversity of age, race, creed, ethnic background, sexual orientation, our active citizenry, our opportunities for success. I believe in the value of education. Benjamin Franklin said, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest, and we need to invest in order to preserve our educational programs and continue to improve, as Selectman Kylie also referenced earlier. I believe in the ability of the people of this town to work together to find solutions to our ongoing challenges. Over and over again, I'm amazed at the commitment and ingenuity of Fairfielders that I meet. We need to be open to innovation, to change, and to truly listening to one another in order to do so. I, too, value and respect very much the civility and respect which has been a hallmark of the conversation here today and throughout our work as a Board of Selectmen. I believe in balance and compromise. Diversity means that we have diverse needs, and we need to respect the needs of others as we ask them to respect ours. As I've said, and we've talked about this, impressed by the number of emails and communications we received. While I agree with the many people who say our administration needs to continue to look for savings and efficiencies, the town is not a business. Our town was formed 375 years ago not to create profit, but to meet the needs of its citizens. Whether we rent or own, whether we've been here for 7 months, 7 years, or 7 generations, we all share in this responsibility to one another. Much of the ongoing budget debate that we've had has centered, and we've talked about this today, on the concept of affordability. Affordability is not just about today's dollars and today's budgets. It involves being clear about our long-term goals, planning for the future, so that today's savings don't result in tomorrow's added expense. Our taxpayers have diverse needs, and we're trying to do the right thing for all of them. I believe the budget we're voting on today is a sound and careful budget. It respects the needs and resources of our town. It can't be all things to all people, but it is the product of extensive work by skilled people serving the interests not of an isolated few, but of the diverse members of our community. I thank, as Selectman Kiley and the First Selectman have done, all those, especially Ms. Gardner. I think he deserves to be named specifically, and Mr. Mayor, for all the work that's been done to bring us here today. And I look forward to continuing the conversation as we go forward. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I can add a few comments, and certainly thank yous at the top of the list to the department heads that helped put this together, the Board of Ed, to the Board of Finance for all the nights they spent with us and all the coffee and goodies they bought, as well as my colleagues on the Board of Selectmen, and as Kristen mentioned, thanks especially to our financial staff. We've got a number of challenges that haven't gone away and we've confronted in recent times, from the economy to storms, to PCBs, to unfunded mandates, to school security, to slow growth in our grand list. When you look at where we are, if you go back a few years, our tax increase could have been less than 1% with the normal grand list growth we were experiencing at that time. The slowing of the real estate market has really been a challenge and has put the burden on our taxpayers higher than ever before. We still have a strong financial foundation. Our cost drivers are more manageable than they have been. Our AAA rating has been revalidated by the credit agencies, and we've got a strong local economy as witnessed by our low vacancy rates. The budget objectives has been kind of referenced a couple times at this table today. We're to manage expenses and provide for high-quality services with no significant reduction in the essential services to our town, to fund our long-term objectives, and to provide and support and funding for a top-quality school system, including the funds for a school security enhancements as we proposed here. And with all that, to strengthen our financial foundation going forward. This budget accomplishes all of that. I want to thank the town and Board of Ed managers and employees for their hard work and dedication throughout the year. We benefit from a number of cost savings measures in this budget that I don't want to forget just because we've done them in the past. Energy conservation, our health care costs that went out to bid and we were able to reduce significantly just last year. The labor agreements that we signed last year that significantly impacted and reduced our labor costs. The electricity and fuel cost purchases that we've been making, and again, congratulations to our purchasing department because their look at futures have saved us significant dollars in recent times. Our safety committee and the training of our employees to help reduce our injuries and workers' comp expense. The use of software and technology everywhere from police to our tax collector's office to improve productivity. And overall, that's one of the reasons we can have fewer employees than we did 10 years ago on the town side of our government. We're moving in the right direction. In the last 5 years, from 2011 to 2015, we've had the lowest expense and tax rate growth in our town in the last 20 years. We are fully funding our long-term obligations. We are not leaving expenses for the future or kicking the can down the road, as several of our neighbors are, and to some degree as this town did in the past. But that doesn't mean that we can beat the dynamics of a business. We are a service business. We are a service organization. And as much as we don't survive for profit incentive, as Kristen, as you mentioned, We do provide services to almost 60,000 residents, and when comparing our expenses per person, we are more efficient and at a lower cost than neighboring communities. So in summary, this budget strikes a balance between a low tax increase and the needed investments that we have to make in the short and long term. It reflects a commitment to meet our long-term obligations. We have negotiated labor agreements that are saving us money, and our town is committed to high-quality education system in a safe and secure environment. This budget continues to make Fairfield the best value in Fairfield County. And again, I want to thank my colleagues on the board for their time, effort, and dedication to reviewing this budget. And I know we'll continue to talk as this budget moves through the Board of Finance and RTM in the weeks ahead. So with that, the budget before us, revenues, expenses for both the town and Board of Ed and the Water Pollution Control Authority stands before us. Any further discussion? Are we ready to vote?
Ready to vote?
All right. Do we have a motion overall to do that?
In the beginning, no one moved and seconded the item. I don't
Okay,
know if
so
that's
let's
something
move and
you
second the overall budget, including revenues, expenses for the Town Board of Ed and the Water Pollution Control Authority. May I have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations. Our part is mostly done.
Mostly.
Mostly done.
Reminds me of that Billy Crystal line.
Yes, I was thinking exactly that.
Princess
Are
Bride?
we, yes, yes, we need, yes.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.